What is up, guys? Joey Szatmary here at BarBend in Brooklyn, New York. We are going to be covering the overhead press, which is going to involve the how to do it, the muscles that we're going to be using, and mistakes that we want to avoid, but overall just to give you guys a more efficient and bigger overhead press. All right, so we're going to cover step one when it comes to the overhead press, and that all starts with the grip on the barbell. So you'll have different coaches tell you different things about where you want to put your hands on the barbell. Some will go a little bit wider, some will go a little bit closer. But for me, as a beginner presser, I just kind of want to establish equidistance from the barbell. What I'm going to have Jake do is actually put his hands on top of the barbell, and he's going to bring his fingers closer in on an angle, probably towards his pecs. That's what I want him to think, is right in the crease of the thumb and the palm. A lot of times people put it too high up in their palm, and it doesn't have a lot of support and structure in the hand. So we want to make sure that it's right on the meaty part of his hands. And like you said, he's kind of turning it in almost if he's trying to make a diamond with his hands. That's the angle we're looking for. Can you feel the difference of it being actually more on like a bone-on-bone structure versus high up in your hand where it's uncomfortable? So that's kind of something we want to think about as we're about to grip the barbell, so we can use as much structural support when doing the press. All right, so now that we have the grip established, we're going to get under the bar into the rack position, and we're just going to walk the bar out 1 to 2 steps. We don't want to waste too much time or energy as we want to get set up for a good strong press here. And as you can see, Jake has his feet right under his hips, which is kind of where I would start anybody at, their hip between hip and shoulder width. But if he could actually bring his feet close together. Typically, we're going to see a lot of people do this, and we'll cover this in the mistake portion of the press, but I don't think this is very efficient. So we're going to have him go back out to his hip or shoulder width stance. We're gonna have his toes slightly out just a couple degrees. And when we're getting set in this position, I want the foot weight distributed mid-foot. So I don't wanna be too much in my toes, and I don't wanna be too much in my heels. So if you can just show too much in your toes, maybe pressing forward a little bit, and then go back all the way into your heels. Okay, it just shows instability in the press, and that's not something we want when we're going for our press. So just kind of have his weight evenly distributed. Butt's gonna be squeezed nice and tight, abs are gonna be nice and flexed, and it's just gonna be in that strong position. So that would be the next step, just covering the stance, and then from here, we're gonna go to the rack position. All right, so now that we're in the rack position, typically when I'm pressing, I like to keep my elbows nice and tight to the body. Okay, so that's just gonna keep, like I said, structural support. I can't overemphasize this enough. We don't want to have anything outside of our midline or center because it's going to make the press harder. So everything's nice and tight and compact. So we're in the rack position. You can see that the barbell is in the crease of his hand, and it's just that nice strong position which we had talked about earlier, and it's stacked wrist over elbow, and this is what I like to see. I don't want to see his elbows too far backwards. I don't want to see him flared out, and I don't want to see him too far forward. So just nice and tight to the body, almost right in line with his sternum. It's just gonna be a good position for him to be pressing from. So on top of all the things we've mentioned previously in the video, one thing I want to cover is prior to the press, the breathing and bracing. So like I had said, we really want him to have his butt squeezed. I think you can generate a lot of power when you activate the glutes in the press, as well as keeping that strong grip. So these are two little things I think often are overlooked, is your grip and force production from there, as well as your glutes. So squeezing that butt, squeezing the bar, and then on top of that, we want to keep our abs nice and tight. So we're just keeping all that inner abdominal pressure built within our chest cavity, so that we can press over top and have as much force as possible. All right, so coming down to the whole meat and potatoes of this whole thing, why you're watching this video is the ending finish of the press. Okay, now before we press the bar up, we want to make sure that we tuck our chin back, because if you don't and you press straight up in the line that we need to, you're going to hit yourself right in the chin or the face or the nose, and just it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly. So we're going to keep that chin tucked back, make a double chin, Jake, like we see that sexy face of yours. There we go. And all we want to do is press straight up. And as we press up, we want to get our ear in line with our bicep. All right, so now that we're at the top of the press, one thing that I think is super easy and overlooked is the position of the wrist and the barbell. So sometimes what you'll see happen is that people cock their wrist back, but as you can see, one that may be a little bit uncomfortable on the wrist, so new beginners may not have the mobility to hold that weight overhead, and also it kind of throws the bar path off of alignment slightly. So just as a beginner, what I recommend is just keeping that same pressing pattern and grip that we had talked about throughout the press previously. And now we're gonna just cover the eccentric on the way down. So as Jake's bringing the bar down, we're just retracing the same line and getting it right back into the rack position without it coming too far off of his body. If there's a lot of weight on this bar and he brings it forward off his midline, it's gonna dump and pull him forward. So we wanna make sure that we're basically just retracing that bar path over and over again. And that's just gonna keep efficiency and strength throughout the entire press. All right, so now we talked about how to press. We're gonna cover some of the mistakes that we commonly see and how to avoid them. So one of the number one things I see with the press that's done incorrectly is pressing the bar out in front and almost around the head. Okay, so if you press straight up and out, which is typically what you see a lot of people who are untrained, it's just very inefficient with bar path, and you're gonna be using a lot more energy than is needed. So the same thing applies for when, like we're seeing Jake pushing out and around his face. We're just using even more energy, and we're kind of creating an arc type of a pressing motion, which isn't gonna be efficient when we want a straight line. So a basic way to correct this is just gonna be by tucking that chin like we talked about earlier, and keeping everything nice and tight and just pressing straight up. And we're able to press straight up because his chin is tucked and he's not hitting himself and going around his head. All right, so now the second thing that I see often with the press is a too wide of a grip. And an easy way to look at it from the front is almost as if his arms are making a W. So Jake, if you go back down, you can see how has pretty much like a W going on with his arms. And the further we get away from our midline, it's just gonna be a harder pressing pattern that we're gonna have to do. So almost think of it as like a snatch grip deadlift, right? Snatch grip deadlifts are gonna be harder typically, and you can't go as heavy as you would a normal grip deadlift. So the same thing applies when it comes to the press. So what I like to do is just get that grip in a lot closer, as we had talked about. And honestly, for me and my own personal preference is actually bring it in slightly closer so he can utilize the triceps a little bit more in the press and keep it nice and tight to his lats. So overall, what I keep saying and just repeating myself is it's gonna be efficient bar path, and the closer we can keep our hands is just gonna help enable that concept throughout the press. All right, so the last mistake that we see often is going to be just overall losing tightness at the top of the press. And there are two big things I wanna focus on when we're in that overhead position, and that's gonna be the foot stance. So if you're pressing overhead and you're losing stability at the top, see if your feet are super narrow. Okay, so what I like to do is actually bring my feet a lot wider, so almost outside of hip width, slowly turn the toes out, and that's gonna be a new pressing position. And basically you wanna think of your feet as the base of a pyramid. Okay, so the top is gonna be the peak of the pyramid, and it's all coming from the base and the setup at the bottom. Now, the next thing we wanna talk about when it comes to stability overhead, so as Jake presses up, we wanna make sure that he keeps that breath and brace, as well as squeezing his butt. Now, when he does this, he's just creating a lot of tension, and it's gonna be a lot more stable than if he had everything loose. So if he didn't squeeze his butt and he was kind of breathing, letting air out, you're gonna see that he's gonna start to shake or be unstable. So by the feet being a little bit wider, abs are tight, butt is squeezed, grip is really tight as well, he's gonna have a lot more stable press at the top. All right, so lastly, we're gonna cover the benefits. And quite honestly, I've never seen a dude with small shoulders have tons of chicks. So if you wanna get tons of chicks, you need to be doing the overhead press, and that's pretty much all the benefits.
Incorrect.
Coming from a strength sport athlete as myself, I've done Olympic lifting, strongman, CrossFit, you name it, powerlifting, all strength sports involved. You're gonna have some sort of press that's typically involved, okay? Especially in my sport of strongman, a big press is one of the best attributes you can have. So if you are involved with strength sports, you need to be pressing and get used to doing some sort of overhead work. So we're using a lot of muscles for one movement, okay? It's not an isolation exercise, so it's gonna be the best bang for your buck. So we're looking at using the triceps, the upper back, all the sides of the deltoid, okay? You got your traps, all sorts of goodies are going down when we do the overhead press. And it's just a really good foundational movement that you wanna have in your arsenal of lifts when it comes to just building your best body possible. All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that entire video based on the press. So we covered basic tips and cues for the press, some mistakes that you want to avoid and how to correct them, the benefits of pressing, and just kind of why we press in the strength sport world. So hopefully you guys enjoyed kicking it with me. I'm Joey Szatmary. You can check me out on YouTube, Zat Strength. My Instagram is Zat Strength as well. And I run the Lions Den Elite Training Facility in Colmar, PA. So that's all I have to say, guys. Peace.